Good morning, everybody, and welcome back to your Lunch Break Live. My name is Ivana Harinkyu if you're new here, and if you're not, thank you for coming back. Today is March the 24th. It is Thursday, and today we are talking about something that happened yesterday, and that is former President Donald Trump dropping his endorsement of Representative Mo Brooks, who is running for that U.S. Senate seat that is open in from Alabama. Today, I am joined by our political reporter, Paul Gattis. You might be a familiar face as he was just here the other day. We roped him back in, and our columnist, Dana Hall McCain. Now, Paul has been following Mo for decades and has known Mo for decades. So he's going to be able to lend us a little bit of institutional knowledge here about what is going on. And Dana is going to tell us a little bit more about the inside of this race, what could happen next, and what she would tell Trump if she was advising him with this endorsement. So both of you, thank you so much for joining us today. And I think we just jump in. I know yesterday we all saw that news early yesterday morning, Trump taking back that endorsement of Mo Brooks, and he hasn't endorsed anybody else yet. He says he plans to, but there was a lot going on yesterday. So, Paul, I'm going to give it to you first. Tell us a little bit about, was this something that we expected to happen? And were you prepared to see this?
Yeah, I think everybody was pretty much expecting this to happen. Trump all but said it was going to happen. I guess it was a little over a week ago when he gave an interview to the Washington Examiner, and he was very talkative about his disappointment in Brooks and his consideration of withdrawing his endorsement. And I think everybody has sort of been waiting for that shoe to drop. And I guess if anything, I was surprised it took as long as it did. I've been kind of keeping one eye glued to my email for about a week, and now I can blink. But that it was not really a big surprise. But at the same time, I don't know if Trump has ever withdrawn an endorsement before. So that makes it a little bit different. That makes it a little bit unique. But
Well, we know Mo Brooks held an event yesterday. I think it was a pre-planned town hall type event in Hueytown, and I went to that, and that was after the news of Trump pulling back this endorsement. So I did go to that. I did get to speak with Mo, and one thing that he said was that he hadn't heard from Trump. Trump had not called him to say, "Look, I'm taking back the endorsement." Dana, does that surprise you?
I don't know if it surprises me or not. I think that if I were Mo, I would share his disappointment in that. When someone publicly calls you an ally and comes to the state, does a big rally with you, talks about you in the press, it would be, I think most people would think it would be common courtesy to let that candidate know if there was going to be a change going forward, instead of allowing them to read it with the rest of the world when the statement was released. So yeah, I can understand Mo being a little bit stung by that for sure.
Well, and something else that Mo said again at this event yesterday that was interesting is he said, look, I don't know if he's going to endorse, he meaning Trump, is going to endorse another Senate candidate. If he does, maybe he'll endorse all of us. He kind of joked about it, and he said that Trump is known for being very unpredictable. And he kind of brushed it off there again, joke saying he could endorse all of us. Dana, what do you think the likelihood of that is?
I don't quite see that happening, but I will say this is a race where ideologically there is not a tremendous difference between these primary candidates. So I'm not sure what value that endorsement really has in terms of informing the Alabama voter in this primary race. If I were advising the former president, I would caution him against jumping out there and doing another endorsement right off the bat. And the reason that I say that is that the two front runners in this race, Katie Britt and Mike Durant, are pretty tightly neck and neck in the polls, depending on which poll, which week. One will be in the lead for a minute, and in the most recent ones, Durant was maybe a couple or 3 points in the lead. But it's a very tight race, and there is still so much spending that remains to be done in this race. Both of these candidates are well funded on their own. They're both prolific fundraisers. Durant has loaned his own campaign, I think, in the neighborhood of $4 million. And then there's a lot of PAC money that is going to flow into these races in the next 3 months. And so we know that that money and the advertising that it buys moves the needle. And none of us, including Donald Trump, can really completely control where that money goes and how it's spent and the impact that that will have on the polling, and obviously the most important poll, one we get on election day. So he could get out there and endorse another candidate and still take a loss. And we know that's the reason that he backed away from Mo. It wasn't this ideological complaint about Mo's softness on election fraud or lack thereof. This was about Mo tanking in the polls and Trump wanting to take a big step back from being associated with an embarrassing loss in a state where he was so popular on the presidential ticket. So I think there's a lot of downside in him jumping out there and taking a risk with endorsing another candidate, especially very quickly.
Right. And that makes sense. Now we know that that is not what the Brooks team says. The Brooks team, and even Trump himself, he didn't say, "Oh, I'm going to pull this endorsement because he's behind in the polls," right? He blamed the comments from that 2021 Coleman rally. You mentioned at the beginning of your statement there, talking about, this former president has come and rallied around Mo Brooks before and had given him support in the state. And that happened again last year, 2021 in Coleman. Now, this is where I think some of this controversy started. And this is what Trump cited in his statement pulling that endorsement. He said that he was not happy with those comments where Mo encouraged the GOP and his supporters at that Coleman rally to just kind of move on from the 2020 election, to look forward and to say, look, we need to get people from our party into the House, into the Senate, and into the White House in the next elections to come. Let's forget about 2020. But both according to Trump in his statement and according to Mo, did not agree with that. He said that he wanted to focus on that 2020 election. I think that the word Mo used as a quote from Trump was that he wanted to rescind that election. Now, Paul, this is something that we have talked about with Mo. We've heard about this since that rally, right? That Trump was not happy about those comments. Now, yesterday, Mo told everybody at the town hall, he told media, look, I'm an attorney. That's what he said. I'm an attorney. There is no legal remedy to go back and do anything to the 2020 election. He said that election was finalized on January 6, 2021. Nothing can be done after that. There's no legal remedy. We got to move on. Now, when I asked him what Trump's response to that was, when both Mo and Trump spoke about this over the phone, Brooks said that Trump had nothing substantial to say in response to that. So, Paul, give us a little bit of what you know about Mo, about his feelings on the 2020 election. And again, I know that Dana says, look, it's just that Trump doesn't want to lose. But what do you think in that front?
Well, and just to do a little promotion or a little tease, I talked with Brooks at length yesterday afternoon, and we talked about Trump asking to rescind the election. He said they talked about it multiple times. They talked about it, and each time Brooks said, that's just not feasible. That's not legal. You can't do it. So now, as far as Brooks on election fraud, now since he has been divorced from Trump, does he still believe that? And I asked him, I said, let's just be crystal clear. Where do you stand on that? And basically his response was, if every legal vote had been counted, Trump would still be president. So while Trump is backing away from Brooks is not backing away from election fraud.
Or from Trump, it sounds like. We're not hearing anything from Mo saying that he's mad at Trump. Even yesterday, he told me, look, the former president has the right to change his mind. He did not say anything disparaging about the president and about the former president in that regard.
Well, it's interesting, and this kind of goes back to something Dana was just talking about, the Trump endorsement. Brooks had the Trump endorsement, and he was still polling a distant third. Now, you put as much stock in the polls as you want, but even with the Trump endorsement, he was polling a distant third. Durant and Britt without Trump's endorsement are leading the race and by a fairly sizable margin over someone who everybody would thought would be the front runner. So it's kind of an open question. What's a Trump endorsement worth? Is it the bar of gold that's popular opinion, or is it more nuanced? And you can look around the country. Of course, and Brooks is eager to make this point too. You can look around the country and other Trump endorsed candidates, they're struggling as well. So, what's a Trump endorsement worth?
And to your point, Paul, I noticed something interesting in some of the polling that came out this week. It was a Signal poll that they did back in August that, polled, I think, 500 likely Republican voters. And one of the questions in that August poll was, how if a candidate is endorsed by former President Donald Trump, does that make you more likely to vote for that candidate? Mm-hmm. And 57.7% of likely Republican voters said yes in August. When they did that same question a week ago, that number had fallen to 39%, which is a noticeable softening. I cannot explain why that number would have softened over recent months, but it does feel like the further the former president gets from the White House chronologically, the less impact maybe his endorsement or lack thereof has on these races out in the highways and byways.
Well, and I saw something in one poll last week or the week before maybe, where it said maybe 40% of those polled were not aware that Trump had endorsed Brooks, which I thought was just stunning. But now, if you look at it, and if almost half of the polling sample was unaware of it, again, it makes you wonder: is it worth what it's perceived to be worth?
Those are both interesting points. And something that you hit on, Dana, that I think is really interesting is this was a bigger deal, say 6 months ago, talking about who Trump endorsed versus now. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. I know you said you don't have a crystal ball to say why that is, but I look at maybe where the world was 6 months ago, mid last year versus where it is today. Coronavirus has been going on. That's kind of the standard at this point, right? That's nothing new. But besides coronavirus, that was still the big topic, the 2020 election, Trump's comments about that, other candidates' comments about that was still very much talked about. Fast forward to today, end of March, there is so much going on in the world. There is the Russian invasion of Ukraine. There are gas prices that are soaring. There are different reports about unemployment numbers, about people going back to work. Are people still in the Great Resignation? There's points there. There's points about family leave. There's talks about all types of different issues. And it seems like there is just more conversation going on politically than there was 6 months ago. There wasn't as much to talk about. So maybe that endorsement was a little bit more conversation fodder, if you will, than today.
Absolutely. I think it's hard to hold the attention of our electorate. We live as a culture now absolutely drowning in information all the time. But I think it gives us very short attention spans in some ways. And I think this is also evidence of the fact that Mo Brooks was not a good fundraiser, and not being able to raise money and do a lot of TV and really tout that endorsement was a problem. It devalued the endorsement for him right out of the gate, that he could not blast it into the living rooms of every Alabama home the way that, some of his opponents could blast their messaging in, because they had that fundraising, were able to buy that media.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, I know that I watch, say, cable maybe one night a week when I'm watching The Bachelor Bachelorette, right? In that 1-2 hour period, I have seen so many different commercials for Katie and for Mike Durant, for Katie Britt and for Mike Durant. So during that 2 hour period, I've seen multiple for each of them. I wouldn't necessarily see a Mo Brooks ad. So that's just, again, sitting down in front of the TV, watching my one show, tallying that up. The numbers are kind of unmistakable there. And something that Mo said yesterday that I thought was interesting, and Paul, I'd love to hear if you have anything to add on this. He said, when asked about the fundraising, he said, we might be in a better position, meaning his campaign, if things had not changed as they have since September of last year when it comes to former President Trump. He said he was going to leave it at that. He did not really elaborate on that, on those conversations. But what do you have that you can add about that?
As far as last September with President Trump.
He said that his campaign would be in a better position today financially if it weren't for the things that have happened since last September with former President Trump. Didn't elaborate. I'm assuming that's
Well,
kind of after that August rally when Trump's mind started to change, or at least that's what he's citing as the reason he changed his mind. But again, Mo didn't elaborate on that. I was wondering if he did with you, or if you had any other insight there.
well, the short answer is I'm not sure I would buy too much into that, because if Trump hadn't dropped his endorsement, Mo Brooks would still be wrapping it up in a bear hug. But if you think back, I mean, Trump has not gotten. There's been one wave of negative stories after another associated with Trump. Even just last night, there was the report from the prosecutor in New York, who said in his resignation letter that he thought Trump was guilty of several felonies. You've had the January 6th committee, which has gotten more and more attention, and that attention's kind of been building up, and it's cast a questionable light on Trump. There's been text messages that have come out from Trump aides that have not been flattering for Trump. So he is, whether you agree with it or whether you don't agree with it, he has kind of taken a beating as far as some of the news reports that have come out. And of course, proponents of Trump can say, well, he's always been taking a beating, and that's probably true too. But this can't be overstated either. Trump is tremendously muted, not being on Twitter and not being on Facebook anymore. He sends out his half dozen email statements every single day, but that is just a drop in the bucket compared to the reach that he had on social media. So you kind of add it all up, and Trump is he's kind of taken a beating, and he hasn't really been able to fight back too well.
Dana, are we entering into a phase of the GOP, of Republican races, Republican primaries, where people are not necessarily dying for that endorsement as they were before? They're not necessarily putting themselves out on the line and trying to go to Mar-a-Lago, trying to get that endorsement. They're more just running their campaign and focusing on winning.
I don't know that we are quite there yet, but based on what happens in these midterm elections, we may find ourselves there pretty quickly. If Trump does not prove that his endorsement nets a win for Republican hopefuls, there will be fewer and fewer of them bending over backwards and contorting themselves and trying hard to win his affection going forward. This is transactional for people on both sides. It's transactional for Trump because he wants the status of being the party kingmaker, especially if he has aspirations of seeking the nomination again in 2024. He wants to maintain that position and mystique of being the one who calls the shots in the GOP. For the candidates, whether or not they fully track with or love Trump's style of leadership, they understand the value of his popularity in certain districts and in certain states, and how that can be a benefit to them. And so I think sometimes they seek his endorsement even when it's not something they want to be doing. It's just a political reality that they are dealing with. But if you look around the country right now, Mo is one of a handful of picks that he has made, endorsements that he has made that are struggling. They're not really just running away with their races. And so I think as more candidates see that kind of outcome in more places, they'll ask themselves, is this something I really want to, bend over backwards and rearrange my messaging to obtain?
Are we still in a position, especially in this race, between Mo, between Katie Britt, and between Mike Duran, where it's almost a competition of who can be the Trumpiest to get the vote?
I don't know. I think in Alabama, where his popularity is as great as it is anywhere in the country, there's always going to be a value to letting voters know that you supported the president's agenda in terms of, policies that he promoted that were exceedingly popular in Alabama during his term of office. But it's like you said, these things trend. They trend upward and they trend downward. And I think depending on what happens in the next 3 months, we'll see another movement in that. It could bolster the Trump factor, or it could further reduce it.
Paul, what is next for Mo Brooks? How does he move on from this? And again, that primary, it's coming up May 24th. I know that seems like so far away, but that's actually 2 months from today. So not that far. It might seem far, May in our minds, but it's coming up. So what's next for Mo? How does he handle these next 2 months?
Well, Mo is just trying to promote a narrative that he hasn't changed. The only person that has changed is Trump. Trump has changed his endorsement. Brooks is like, I'm the same person I was when he endorsed me. I'm the same person when you unendorsed me. The key to that, though, and that's a strategy starting off, 28 hours after losing that endorsement. But it's going to be, does that resonate? Is there going to be a poll that's going to come out in 2 weeks that's going to show that Brooks is at least not lost ground and needs probably to make up ground? So I think right now it's going to be a matter of trying to figure out where his lane is, what he can make work, what he can make resonate with the voters. And like we talked about earlier, he has not been on TV, and that is something that's got to change. And he doesn't have the money that Durant has. He doesn't have the money that Brett has. But we're also to the point now that what you do have, you got to start spending it. And so I think you're going to see a lot more of Mo Brooks on TV, and we'll see if that makes a difference. This is almost like a game of Survivor. Two people are going to the runoff. I think everybody probably expects there's going to be a runoff. Somebody's going home. Who is that one person going to be?
Dana, what do you think next 2 months of this race?
I think Paul's right in that to dig out of this hole he's in, because he is in a hole. Mo is going to have to spend some serious money, and he's going to have to hit the road and actually campaign. When you look at social media and news coverage every day, Katie Britt especially is at every fish fry and crossroads in this state, shaking hands and meeting people. And I do not see Mo Brooks putting in that kind of mileage and really getting out there and meeting voters outside of North Alabama. And we exist, and we vote. And I really haven't seen Durant getting out and meeting voters in that same fashion either, but he has been able to carve out his position with television spending. So Mo's going to have a chance to come back and be a serious contender in this race. He's going to have to kick it in gear in both fronts. And I don't know if he can or if he will.
It sounds like it's fair to say from all sides here that we're going to have a busy next 2 months. We meaning us here in the media. It's going to be a busy next 2 months. Again, that primary coming up on May the 24th here in Alabama. And again, Paul Gattis and Dana Hall McCain, thank you so much for your insight here, for your expertise. We're going to link a lot of the coverage that we did yesterday, both from Paul, from Dana. We're going to link that here. And I know that Paul mentioned he's got a story coming out soon with an interview from Mo from last night. So again, Dana, Paul, thank you so much. Everybody watching, thank you. We'll see you tomorrow.